Welcome to Linda's Corner. My name is Linda Bjork, and today we're going to be talking about holding on to hope. I'm delighted to welcome special guest Caroline Rose. Caroline is a 3-time stage 4 cancer thriver. Today, Caroline is enjoying her 11th year of living cancer-free. She travels the country sharing a message of hope that resonates with thousands of people. Welcome, Caroline. I'm so glad that you could join with me today.
Thank you, Linda. I'm so happy to be here.
I am delighted to be speaking with you, and I'm so sorry for all the struggles and the things that you have gone through, and I'm grateful that you're here to be able to share hope with other people who may be going through the same thing or something different. Would you mind sharing your story?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. And I always say if this story can touch even one person, it's worth, everything and all the efforts that I do because, jumping to the end, I think I've learned that hope is essential. And I think it's easy to say that when you really haven't been put in a position that really tested that statement. And I have been in that situation a couple times. And so I feel that I am qualified to say it, knowing that hope doesn't always mean it's going to turn out the way we want it, but that it is the most essential thing we can hold. And really it all started when I was 27. I was the definition of type A. I was marathon runner. I was in med school. I was very regimented and scheduled and had started doing triathlons and was actually training to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa with my brother.
Wow.
When some blood work, the pre-Africa, blood work along with the vaccines, they really showed this huge red flag that my platelets were at a life-threatening level, which really led to a very quick diagnosis. And we realized it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it was everywhere. It was stage 4. It was in my stomach, my spleen, my bone marrow. And it was hard to accept because I'd never had one symptom. The doctors kept
That's what
saying,
I was thinking. You didn't have any symptoms that brought you in. You were feeling healthy. You were going to go climb a mountain. And it was the blood work. Wow,
yes.
That's amazing.
And, it's funny because, I should probably say my pug just walked in, my little dog, and he's snoring now under my desk. So if y'all hear sounds like a pig, that's Axel. But, I think that was one of the scariest parts when I called my friends to tell them this, because I think I was sort of, in most people's minds, that healthy individual. I didn't have a lot of bad vices, I guess, and I was in the best shape of my life, I'd done the Boston Marathon. I had just kept kind of going and getting stronger and better. And for the past 5 months, I'd had this very aggressive, very fast growing cancer, like raging through my body. I never had any of the common symptoms. So that was terrifying. And just the fact that it could happen to someone so young and so quote unquote healthy really rocked everybody. It rocked everybody, really, maybe more so my friends than me at the beginning, because I was still in denial. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking this couldn't be, but if it is, I'll take care of it. I will just go in there and do what I have to do. And I remember after we'd done all the stage testing and we really went in for the information meeting with my doctor, where she really just laid it on the table. Stage 4, this is what it is, highly aggressive. And then she said, and you need to know this is incurable. We cannot cure this. Oh. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat you, and it's not going to be easy. But our goal with this is just to get you under remission. And then it's going to come back. It's not maybe going to come back. This is going to come back. And it'll probably come back sooner rather than later. So that, for me, more than the diagnosis, was the hardest thing to accept, because again, I'm in my type A personality. I needed a goal and I needed a way to get it, and I needed to solve this really. And that night, my uncle lives in Houston, and at the time he was very involved with MD Anderson, which is where I had been to meet with my doctors. And I remember he came to my room that night, and I was inconsolable. I was so devastated. And he said, Caroline, here's the thing. Last week was at MD Anderson. I'm in these meetings with these doctors and these researchers and seeing everything that's happening, all the incredible things that these doctors are working on and the findings and these new drugs that are in development. They may not be for your specific disease, but all you need to do right now is buy time. And you need to do baby steps to do the best thing you can do today, just to live another day. Because if you can just keep living another day, when you need another treatment in the future, chances are very high they're going to have a new, awesome, maybe even curative treatment that they don't have now. And so that really impacted me hugely. I'm still talking about it all these years later.
It puts a little bit of hope back in the equation. Because the first time you talk to a doctor, it's there is no hope. There is no hope. There is nothing. And now it's maybe. Just that little bit. That little bit, which I think is so true in life, right? Yes. I mean, I find myself saying similar things to my kids, or just, just that idea of buying time, and just things can be so devastating in the moment. And I remember I was at a back to school night for my daughter a couple of years ago, and her teacher said something that, I'm like, I need a pen. I have to write this down. But she said, she really kind of operates off this philosophy of, okay, I see you're upset. Is this going to be a big deal in 5 minutes? Is it going to be a big deal in 5 hours, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 years? And really, you kind of work your way out and you think, no, I guess this really won't be a big deal in 5 minutes or 5 days or whatever it is, because it puts it in this perspective and you think, all right, like this is devastating right now. And that is that hope, right? That's what turns it, is when you can say that but, because it does kind of negate the devastation and the negative. That's exactly what happened. Everything my uncle predicted. I got into remission. 8 months later, my cancer came back, and I did my first bone marrow transplant, which was difficult. It was very difficult, but I got through it, and I went into remission for 3.5 more years. And that is when I had my daughter, who's today she's 13, and my son, who is 11. But when my daughter was 2 and my son was just 5 weeks, we found out that my cancer had come back for the 3rd time. Oh,
and
scary.
That was like, because I was a mom, and I thought we'd cured it. We'd done this transplant and the doctors were so happy and so hopeful. And I'd moved on in my life. I thought, I learned what I needed to learn. I'm good. We have these babies, and then it was a shock. It was devastating. And then it's not about me. It's about my kids, and wanting to be there for them. And the other thing, when we first spoke to our doctor, was there weren't really a lot of options, because we'd done everything that we had readily available. But sure enough, he did some research, and there was a clinical trial, and there were 68 patients, and he got me in as number 66. And it was insanely difficult. Brought me to my knees numerous times. I was in the hospital for months at a time. I ultimately had a second bone marrow transplant, very, very different protocol from the first. And it worked. And this was so new at the time, so groundbreaking. And the 68 of us who went through that protocol, I think it's an incredibly high success rate. I think it's over 85%.
Wow.
And
really?
so I think it's in the, with the FDA and being, made more mainstream, but that was exactly what happened. And it proved my uncle's wisdom. I'll say that.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad, and I'm so grateful. The research and the things, as you're telling your stories, and my brain is thinking of this friend who had cancer and that one. And my grandson was diagnosed with cancer at age 5 months, and he was on a clinical trial, and he was one of the fortunate ones where it helped him. And now he's 1 and he's running around, and I look at him and he just makes me want to cry every time I see him. It's like, you look so normal and so beautiful that if I didn't know, I wouldn't know. And so, but they don't all turn out that way. And my sweet son-in-law lost his brother about the same age that you first got your cancer. So
I'm so sorry.
it turns out different ways. I liked in the beginning when you talked about how it's going to be okay, and we don't know what okay looks like. And that's so hard because we all know what we want okay to look like. We want it to look like you. And it doesn't always turn out that way.
It doesn't. And that is, I think, a hard thing to wrap your head around is this idea of hope. And I think, I've been challenged on it by people who are devastated, and I get it, and I think one example I have from my life, my dad was a twin, and his twin brother, we lost him 2 years ago, and he was very sick, and he was in the ICU. We were there for about 4 days, and we're by his bedside, and we all have hope. We all have a lot of hope, and the doctors are coming in with new things to try. And my dad is a doctor, and he knew a lot about this situation. And he told me out in the hall about a day before my uncle passed, he said, I don't think he's going to make it. And I said, Dad, why don't you tell, my aunt and cousins, like, why don't you tell them? And my dad, like the scientist, the surgeon, the guy that relies on facts, he said, I will never take away someone's hope. And I thought, oh my gosh, because he's seen stuff like this. He's seen miracles happen, and he's seen things shock everybody, right? And there's that chance, and it's probably not going to turn out the way we want it. But then I think that our hope shifts. It just changes, I look at my cousins and my aunt today, and my cousin had a little boy who looks exactly like my uncle. And I see that joy through that baby and what their hopes and dreams and joys are now. It just shifted, and you can't avoid the pain because that's life. We all have pain, unfortunately.
We do.
We have pain, and that's where we find that really awesome human connection. But that hope is what gets us through that pain.
I agree. Mm-hmm. And there's another word that researchers, I love how you talked about your dad with all of the science and with all of the, technology. We still talk about hope. And researchers and psychologists talk about positive expectancy, which is kind of another word for hope, and that's expecting a positive outcome. And it is absolutely critical for the success of any kind of treatment that we feel like, we're not going to go through the pain and the struggle of trying to get better if we don't think we're going to get better. So those kinds of things, and it matters, not just our body, but our mind and the joy as you're going through the process. So
100%.
You talk about going through cancer as a mother. One of my wonderful friends has been dealing with that as she's had cancer for probably about 10 years. And I talked to her son, he's about 12, and he says, I don't ever remember a time when my mom wasn't sick. And he talked about how challenging it was for her and how she just did her very, very best to support him and to do things. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about what that's like? And
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was diagnosed the third time. And, my first thought are these babies, right?
Right.
And how do I do this? I've never done this as a mom. And so now it's not about me. It's not about my husband. It's not about my dog. It's not about this is about these kids. And how do we do this for them? And I was given, I think she's an angel, although I know she's flesh and blood, but she seems like an angel. A friend booked an appointment for me with a child psychologist. And we had one session, and the things that she taught me, I use them daily, and they were my backbone, and really she said, always be honest with them. If you're not honest, they're going to start to sense something is wrong, and then they're going to feel in their own way at this young age that they can't trust you. They can't trust life because something's up, but they don't know what. And then they develop this anxiety, right? So it was interesting in that my daughter was so young and my son was, an infant. And that was about a year that I went through it when they were so little. So it ended up taking my daughter to a little over 3 and my son a little over 1 years old. And she also said, she calls it name it to tame it. So when they're having these feelings, even today, we call it like bad anxiety or whatever it is, because they can identify it. She also said with my daughter, when you're talking to her about this in an age appropriate way, say something like, well, mommy has this big germ bug in her body, not a little germ bug, like a fever or a cough or something that you may, need to have some medicine to help. But this is a big germ bug. And when mommy loses her hair, it's just because the medicine is working to kill that really big germ bug. And, we got those syringes and we put finger paint in them. And we let her play on a table with butcher paper to hold the syringe. But there was colorful paint in it, and we created some colorful art with it. And, I had the tubes in my chest to name those, let her name them, and really try to make it less scary, and that it was, you could touch it and you could talk about it and you could have a funny name around it. And I think that everything she advised, especially the part about just being honest with your kids in an age appropriate way, has taken us to today where, like I said, they're 13 and 11. They've never known mom to be quote unquote normal. They know mom rests every day. They know mom can't go a lot of the same places a lot of the other moms go. They know mom is going to have days or a couple days in a row of not getting out of bed because she's sick. She doesn't feel well, whatever side effect might be popping up at the time. And I'm not going to say that it is not stressful for them, but they know that it will not be the end. They know it, just ride it out and then it'll be okay. She also said to never make a false promise. So never, when I was going in through for my transplant, don't say, I promise you I'll be home in X amount of days. Or actually don't even say, I promise I'll be home. Because I didn't know, there was a very high mortality rate. I didn't know. So keep the promises you can keep. Make the promises you can keep. And I try to still do that today, where it's not, I promise I will pick you up today from school. I think I'm going to. Pretty sure I'm going to, but there's a chance I may not. So therefore, they know who the backup people are, and we try to keep that as consistent as we can. And I think it has helped them develop an empathy that is very heightened. I think that they are so aware of what other people go through. And I'm working on, especially with my son, not taking on other people's emotions and anxiety. I don't want it to get to that point. But I think it has made them these wise, empathetic kids that are just have a very broad sense of awareness of life and kind of the fragility of it. And just being so grateful for what we have in our family. I mean, we are the biggest homebodies. It is just, we don't even, it's a joke now. My son won't spend the night out. Not because he just doesn't want to, he just likes being home with his family and his own bed. And that's what we do. And it's just because it's what we've realized we want to do. You kind of strip away the noise. And that's a pretty cool thing when you're just content and happy with the stuff that is at the end of the day what matters.
I loved everything that you mentioned. And it's interesting as you talk about the processes, some of things that are a little bit counterintuitive, that name it and explain it. A lot of times people want to protect their children by hiding things from them and pretending everything is okay. And that kind of thing, I love that you brought out the kids can sense it and that they feel that anxiety because they can't name it. And the way that you described it with that age-appropriate big bug, I thought was absolutely brilliant. And then the outcome that these kids are taking away, that increased empathy and kindness and love and appreciation, it sounds like it has been a blessing to them. Even going through sometimes hard things, we don't feel like, it's kind of a present, but it's wrapped in sandpaper where it kind of rubs you the wrong way, but it turns out okay. And you mentioned, as we were discussing before we started recording, how this has affected your personality even and how you view things. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being 11 years out from my second transplant, so I've had 11 years cancer-free, have dealt with side effects, but cancer-free. I think I'm far enough out that I can look back on what I went through with a healthy perspective. I think I was in survival mode for a long time and just had to get through it. And every year out, I processed a little bit more. And I realize now, it's actually pretty clear to me now looking back, that pre-cancer, I was just type A. I was going to make my life exactly the way I wanted it. I was not looking for help. I was not looking for an answer. I was not asking anyone. I was going to make this life work. I was going to be a surgeon. I was going to be an ultra marathon runner. And I think that with each diagnosis, it really was God's way of kind of hitting me over the head. Like, you need to go this way, and I'm like, no, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't, And I think by the third, being a mom and being literally brought to my knees, that's when I absolutely surrendered. And I looked up like, okay, tell me again which way you wanted me to go, because I think I'm going to try that, because this is not working. And so I kind of went from type A+++ to type B-. I mean, it's a joke in my family. I think it's people that haven't seen me in years, it is a little shocking because everyone says you're so much more fun now. you were so not fun to be around. And I think it is just really realizing, I don't know if I'm going to be here tomorrow. None of us sadly do. And sort of making peace with that, and also surrendering, but yet trusting also a little bit, trusting my faith, trusting life, trusting people around me, and trusting my body, that if something were to happen, it's not my body's fault. It's not my fault. It just is what it is. And that has been my biggest struggle, is that fear and anxiety that comes with not knowing about tomorrow or next week, and being afraid to plan things, or also being afraid to not do it now, not take that family vacation right now. It can't be next year because I don't know if I'm going to be here next year. I need to do it now. And so thank the Lord for my husband, because he kind of balances that a little bit. But it is a very more peaceful way to live, just sort of with the acceptance that I've had to give. It really isn't a choice, and it hasn't been easy to get to this point. And every day it's still a challenge, but that is the way that I have to live to be able to function normally, really.
I loved when you talked about the word surrendering, and yet it sometimes people have the idea of, surrendering means you gave up, or, you're completely out of control. And yet I can see you as a positive, powerful, wonderful person. And so it doesn't mean, I think, the thing that we knee-jerk react it to mean. It means to be okay with what is and to be able to move forward.
Yeah. I actually, as you're saying that, it's interesting. I think surrendering might be the opposite of what we think it means, because I think it is the hardest and most courageous and takes the most strength to surrender. It puts you in the most vulnerable position, and it exposes you completely, right? And that is the hardest thing to do. So it takes the most courage. So really, and I guess I'm realizing the people that are able to surrender, even a little bit, I'm not perfectly surrendered every day, but when in the moments in life when we're able to, it's actually kind of the opposite. It's like, that's awesome. Like, how hard was that for you to do, and how courageous and, admirable, I guess. So it's, I don't know, that was an interesting thing I just thought about when you were talking.
Yeah. I think there's almost double meanings or layers of meanings for what we, on the surface, we expect things to be, and what strength looks like, and what courage looks like, and what being in control looks like. And then when you get a little deeper, it means something different, but it's actually better.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. That is a great point.
Crazy. Now you have a dog, and it's a service dog, and it was important and part of your healing. Would you like to tell about your dog?
Very much so important. Yes. So my dog, he passed 4 years ago, and his name was Riley, and our last name is Rose. So Riley Rose.
Beautiful.
This dog came to me in the most unexpected way. I've always loved animals. I've always loved dogs. But my husband and I had just gotten married. We were living in Santa Monica. And we looked for a while, finally found this little cute rental cottage. And on the top of our paperwork, it was no dogs allowed, bold, underlined, could not miss it. And I was terrified of our landlord, who I now adore. But he'd had a bad incident with a dog when he was little, and just he didn't want dogs anywhere around. So one day I was in this waiting phase. I was in between my first and second diagnosis, and I'm in that part where I know my cancer is going to come back, but I don't know when. And how do you live with that, especially when I had been taken out of medical school, but I couldn't go back and I couldn't get a job. So what do you do, right? And one day I Googled Rescue Dogs Los Angeles and was scrolling through, and I saw his face. And, I saw his big Great Dane lab mix, huge, looked like a gigantic yellow lab. And his eyes were just so sad. And I picked up the phone and I called, and I made an appointment to go. He was being put down that day. So they said, you need to come, you need to come now. And I called my husband and I said, I think we're going to get a dog. And he said, well, I hope it's a small dog, because Jerry does not allow dogs. That was our landlord. And I thought, oh, good Lord, it's a Great Dane lab mix. How am I going to do this? And there was no reason for me to bring Riley home. There was not one reason that made sense. But it was a God thing. I brought that dog home, and he was emaciated. He was 111 pounds and just skin and bones. He'd been horrifically abused. And he did not trust anyone. Rightly so. That dog was in the corner, shaking, terrified, would not let anyone get close to him. 2 weeks it lasted. And I thought, what have I done? This dog, he's only a year old, but I'm not going to be able to do this. And then one night I was cooking some steak in the kitchen, and I saw him kind of creep in, and I gave him a bite of steak, and he took it from me, and I saw like a little tail wag, and he kind of came closer, and I reached over and I grabbed my husband's steak and I gave Riley the whole steak. I'm like, you can have it. And that was it. And I think that was the start of this bond. I think it had started 2 weeks prior, but I think once we clicked and once he trusted me, that was this bond with a dog that I've never had. And again, now being able to look back, he was broken, but so was I. And I was very much thinking, I am going to save this dog and I'm going to be the hero. But he saved me, and what ended up happening was this bond and this journey that we went on together. He was there for absolutely everything. He was there for the cancer. He was there for the treatments. He was there by the toilet when I was throwing up. He had his head on my stomach when I was pregnant. He was slept by the kids' cribs. When I went to the hospital, and I tear up every time I talk about it, had to say goodbye to the kids and didn't know if I was going to come back. I remember saying goodbye, and I remember my daughter saying, but Ma, who's going to have tea parties with me? And I kind of was trying to come up with an answer, and she turned around and said, oh, that's right, Riley will have them. It's okay, Mom, you can go. And it was this feeling of, I knew he was emotionally supporting me, but I didn't realize the impact it had on the kids too, because he's this big, lovable, giant. They could wrap their arms around, and my son was crawling at the time, and he'd just crawl up to Riley, and kids don't know, and they're batting, and they put a Mickey Mouse drill up his nose. My daughter gave Riley pedicures. I mean, it was hysterical. And Riley just took it, and I think as the kids got older, for me, I realized I was tired. I was really tired because I was aware that I'd put my family through so much worry and so much, disruption and emotion, and just being in the hospital, being there for my kids, doing so much for us. And they did it and never complained about it. But I was aware of the toll it had taken. And so I wanted to be good. I wanted to be happy and felt great and have lots of energy, but I didn't. I was sad. I felt horrible, and I was exhausted. And I needed, although I didn't know I desperately needed a being, a creature that I could just be around and not have to smile, not have to talk, not have to get anything, not have to be on. I could just be as tired or sad or whatever as I needed to be. And that was Riley, and he was getting older in those years. And I remember, kids would go to school and we'd come back and get in bed. He could stay in that bed just right up against my legs until the kids got home. And it just recharged me, and I remember being, okay, I can do this. We can do this. And that's what he was. And he became a service dog. I don't remember. I guess it was a couple years after my transplant, and ended up going everywhere with us. And he went to Disneyland. He did the rides. He did all of our flights back and forth we were living in California, but I grew up in Texas. We were back and forth all the time. And, he touched us, but he touched others in this way that I've never seen. And my favorite story, because this is just one of many, but this is an example of just the incredible healing power this dog had. We were at Disneyland one morning waiting in line for the gates to open. And I have my kids, and Riley's sort of, on the grounds, taking a little nap. And I hear this gasp behind me, and I kind of turn around, and I'm noticing this little boy has his hand on Riley, and the mom is getting a little bit emotional. And she said, "I'm so sorry. My son is autistic and terrified of animals. And we've really been working with him because we're not sure why. And he wanted to come stand here behind y'all. And I can't believe he's touching your dog right now." I mean, this was apparently a major thing for this little boy. And we start talking, and then I hear this gasp again, and I look down, and the little boy has put his whole body lengthwise across Riley on the ground. And Riley he never moved, and the mom was so speechless. She's taking pictures and this little boy was so happy, just so content and so peaceful being on top of this large animal. And she looked at me and she said, "I hope you know how incredibly special that dog is." And I thought, I know, but I am constantly reminded at how other people think that as well. This wasn't he's my dog, so he's the best. This was a dog that was put on this earth to heal. And he did, after he passed, the letters that we received in the mail, we kept them because it would be from the most random person in your life, like the dry cleaner person. We loved that dog so much, and I hope you know what an impact he made. And things that you're thinking, I'm speechless, that was this dog.
That is amazing. And when we talk about, you explained where Riley came from and saved from the brink of death and going through a healing process and being able to feel safe and being able to give and having that impact that just spread so far and was just felt even by the little boy, by your friends and neighbors. And this is kind of a type, an example of what you have done as you have healed and have come back from the brink of death. And now you are sharing, and people that hear you and people that see you and have a chance to interact with you feel that healing power as you reach out and extend your influence. So thank you. Thank you for all that you've done and for what you have shared. I really appreciate you being here with me today.
Thank you so much.
In closing, I'd like to share a quote by pancreatic cancer survivor Diego Zamora. He said, "Enjoy every day without worrying about the next." Whatever struggles you're going through, I invite you to enjoy today. See you next time on Linda's Corner.